This clip is brought to you by SaveWithConrad.com. So the show's reported to have done better than a 3% buy rate, which was the highest of any Rumble pay-per-view. That means a gross of about 8.9 million. 440,000 buys were reported here. Indeed, it's the most purchased Royal Rumble until 1999, which did 650,000. Now, this is crazy, but this Rumble in 91 does more than the WrestleMania show from 91. In fact, it does more than any other WrestleMania until 1998. If you look at the numbers, this is where things begin to fall fairly quickly for the company. Why do you think that is, Bruce? I mean, normally WrestleMania is top dog, and then we're battling it out. Will it be Rumble or SummerSlam in the number 2 slot? But Rumble 91 beats them all. What's up with that?
Well, I thought it was first of all, it was a pretty interesting Rumble in and of itself with some of the names that were in it. But I think overall, as far as the fall, is kind of when we started everything with Iraq, or Iraq started everything with us, or however the fuck that happened. And the country in and of itself was the first war that we had been in a long time. And your baby boomers coming up, it was, the Vietnam War had ended, I don't know how many years, 20 years before. So it'd been a long time. And I think that affected the economy, but it also affected the mood of the country, in that everybody's business was down and business wasn't good in general at this time. It was a struggle. It was a fight.
Listen, a lot of people are going to point to the storyline that you're doing here and say, oh, it's because you turned everyone off. But to your point, business was going to be down that year for WCW and everywhere else in wrestling. What would your response be to the critics who would say that this whole Desert Storm, Sgt Slaughter, blah, blah, blah angle is going to be one of the driving factors in folks turning out in droves?
I would say that, first of all, that having to do it all over again, hindsight being 2020, we wouldn't have done it. And it was timely, and it was, in many ways formulaic in how we had presented storylines before, mirroring what was going on in the world, and being able to take conflict in the world and bring that conflict into the ring in a storyline that hopefully would make sense. And this was probably just a little too soon, a little too close to home. And I don't think that anyone ever really thought that, except until this weekend, that we were actually going to have a full conflict and go to war. It was, there was conflict out there, and everybody was watching what's going on in Iraq. But you think that, you hear this shit all the time. Oh, goddamn, there's conflict. This guy did that. Well, we sent in troops. We did this. But there's no big major war. And this one turned into that major war that people hadn't been a part of in many, many years. And I think that it just affected the psyche of the country.
I guess the idea here is, we're going to talk about it a lot, but for years and years, there had been, villains in wrestling that maybe weren't in the best taste. There were Nazi characters. I mean, Fritz von Erich. And then there was, the deal. We can go on and on, but I guess, is this one of those sort of teachable moments where Vince makes the decision moving forward, we're going to have to do things a little differently. We're going to have to, because it did feel like for a long time, wrestling sort of had a tendency to play the lowest common denominator.
Everybody did. Entertainment did. Entertainment. Yes. Look at the movies that they did, with Japanese and the war and Hiroshima and different things like that, Pearl Harbor. World War II, World War One, it were glamorized in the movies, and the villains were accentuated. These, the evil Russians, the evil Germans, the evil Japanese that had taken, they'd taken the shape of the villain in America's eyes. But when you look at what the other side did, they did the same thing with us.
I'm not arguing that, but I do think it's a little different when you have a touring brand. The idea being those characters who played a Nazi or a Japanese pilot or whatever, they're going to go do interviews and promote their movie or their TV series or whatever, not as the character, but as themselves, and talk about this movie as a standalone thing. Whereas when Sgt Slaughter shows up to, Regis and Kathy Lee, he's in his full garb. It's a totally different context, is it not?
To some point. Yeah, to some point. But I think that it had always been, you look at Japanese wrestling, where Japanese wrestling really took off is when they started bringing Americans in to be the villains, to be the heels. Hey, here's the bad guys that, came over after Pearl Harbor and leveled cities. So, let's bring them in and portray them as these nasty, people. Forgetting about they bombed Pearl Harbor first. So, it was both sides. Both sides absolutely sensationalized it. And that was part of entertainment at the time. And that was something that was done. And when talent would go to different countries, I mean, you would go to Germany and you would go to, anybody didn't really go to Russia, but you'd go to Germany and work in Germany. And that's how a lot of guys got heat. I'm not saying it's right by any stretch of the imagination. And as you look back on it, it was just downright wrong, but it was a different time. It was a completely different time of a different society that accepted that, and not only accepted it, but expected it.
When you look back and you think about, war, conflict, or whatever you want to call it in the WWE, are the two examples, and obviously they're way different, but they do have some similarities in that they were playing off of a real life event. Now, one was in hindsight and one was very much in the moment. I mean, by days. This and Muhammad Hassan, are those the only two instances? Because it feels like they're a little out of the comfort zone, a little out of what you normally do, and a very similar result on both.
I'd say that both were victims of bad timing as well as just, probably bad characters and just
bad judgment.
I don't know about judgment. It was timing. I think that if they'd been done at any other time where some of the outside circumstances hadn't taken place, I think that they would have been fine. But when you start seeing people in war, which they had never seen in real time before, you got to remember, your closest war was Vietnam, and that magnitude, and all you saw was film that when it finally got back, but you didn't see the reporting of the war the way that they were able to report it in 1991 with CNN and having cameras, live cameras there that were reporting it. That was unheard of.
Right.
And it was the first time anyone in the world had actually experienced that.
Yeah, that's a great point because, cable had not really been a thing, it wasn't possible. And, now with cable, you get 24/7 coverage of this with reporters on the ground there. It's a different thing. I mean, for the first time, Americans are seeing stuff in real time and not hearing about it after the fact. Hey, it's Conrad Thompson. Thanks for checking out the podcast here on YouTube. Be sure to hit the subscribe button and the notifications bell so you get a notice anytime we upload some new content. And go save yourself some money right now. If you're in a 30-year loan or you have credit card debt, it's not a matter of if I can save you money. It's a matter of how much. Find out right now for free at SaveWithConrad.com.